There are seasons in life when the silence around your suffering feels louder than any scream. When your pain is not only ignored but strategically dismissed by those who should have stood by you. And in that silence, something inside you begins to break. Not because you are weak, but because the weight of carrying your sorrow alone becomes unbearable. They didn't just hurt you with their words or actions, they hurt you by pretending they didn't see the damage, by acting like your breaking point was just drama, your cry for help an inconvenience. They moved on while you sat in the ruins of what used to be your peace. You watched them sleep soundly while your mind spiraled with questions. You witnessed their joy while your soul was gasping for breath, and worst of all, they silenced your pain, mocked it, dismissed it, buried it. But silence is not the absence of justice. It is often the stage upon which divine justice is prepared in full. What they didn't understand is that by turning their back on your wounds, they were turning their face away from the very God who is watching. And when God sees injustice masked behind false peace, He doesn't strike with noise. He begins the unraveling in silence. Just like your pain was ignored, their collapse will be quiet. No alarms, no announcements, no pity. Their peace will begin to crack in places no one else can see. Restlessness, broken sleep, guilt, fear of exposure, trembling moments of self-doubt. And it will keep growing until the very fortress of peace they lived in becomes their cage. This is not vengeance. This is not cruelty. This is justice wrapped in mercy. Because even as He breaks what kept them proud, He's inviting them to see what they refuse to acknowledge in you. The weight of pain carried in silence. Pain ignored is not pain forgotten, and God forgets nothing. You didn't ask for this war. You didn't wish destruction upon them. All you wanted was to be heard, to be seen, to be treated with the dignity your soul deserves. But when humans fail to acknowledge human sorrow, God steps in, not with thunder, but with silence of His own. The same silence that watched over you while you wept is now the silence that watches over them while their inner world begins to fall apart. We often think justice needs to be loud, that vindication needs to be televised, but real justice, heaven's justice, is often quiet. It doesn't always arrive with consequences written in headlines. Sometimes it enters as a whisper in the night, as a weight on the chest that can't be explained, as a sudden awareness that what they once silenced now echoes back louder than ever. And you don't need to lift a hand. You don't need to seek revenge. God saw it all. He saw every time you swallowed your tears just to keep the peace. He saw every moment you held your breath to avoid causing discomfort. He saw every breakdown behind closed doors while they walked away untouched. And now He moves. Their peace will collapse, but not through storms of your making. It will collapse quietly, perfectly, divinely, just like your pain. And in that collapse, they will hear the cries they once ignored. They will remember the silence they enforced. They will face the mirror they broke in you. Let's now go deeper into the layers of this divine process. Let's uncover how God allows such collapses, not out of wrath, but out of justice, and how, in that collapse, you are not only restored, but also vindicated in ways words could never explain. God let you break in silence so He could rise within you. It's one thing to be hurt, it's another to be hurt in silence, surrounded by people who pretend nothing happened. You weren't just wounded, you were made to feel invisible. And in that invisibility, you began to believe that your pain had no witness. But that wasn't true. While they turned away, God drew closer. He allowed you to walk through the valley of brokenness without noise, not because he was absent, but because he was preparing to dwell in the quietest parts of you. That silence became sacred ground. It was the soil where your soul, stripped of all illusions, learned to listen. Not to people, not to the world, but to him. You stopped begging for them to understand. You stopped fighting for a seat at their table. Slowly, something began to shift inside you. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something greater than pain, divine presence. While the world ignored your tears, heaven gathered every drop. And in that sacred silence, God began to reframe your heart. He didn't fix you in a moment. He redefined you over seasons. You see, when everyone is listening, you often wear a mask. But in solitude, there's no one to impress. In isolation, there's only truth. And God loves truth. He meets people there, not in their crowds, but in their caves. That's where he met Elijah. That's where he met David. That's where he met you. And now, you don't speak the same way. You don't respond the same way, because something happened in that silence they never knew. God stood with you. God wept with you. God whispered strength into your soul while others whispered gossip about your situation. And now, the one they tried to silence has become unshakable, not because of noise, but because of what grew in quiet. They never saw your transformation coming because it didn't happen on a platform. It happened in your prayer room. It happened in your sleepless nights. It happened when you chose not to retaliate. And now that you've risen from your silence, they will begin to fall in theirs. Not because you asked for it, but because heaven balances what man breaks. Let this remind you, God doesn't always deliver with thunder. Sometimes he builds you in the silence, and while you are breaking, you are also being built. That's the divine paradox. They thought silence meant you were finished, but in heaven's language, silence means the potter is at work. God will collapse their peace the way they collapsed your confidence. They had peace while you had panic. They rested while you wrestled. They smiled while you suffered in silence, pretending their actions were innocent or justified. Every time you tried to speak, they made you feel like the problem. Every time you wanted clarity, they offered confusion. And slowly, your confidence didn't just shake. It collapsed. It didn't collapse because of weakness. It collapsed because the people you trusted chose comfort over truth. And now, the very peace they rested in, peace that came from denial and self-preservation, is about to unravel, not by your hand, but by the hand of the one who saw it all. God is just, and his justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through chaos. The same way they ignored your breaking point, God will allow them to face theirs. Alone, confused, misunderstood, their peace will start to decay, not in dramatic events, but in subtle losses. Unexplained unrest, lost sleep, internal friction, the kind of collapse that can't be blamed on anyone else because it's divine. You tried to warn them, didn't you? Not in vengeance, but in vulnerability. You tried to explain how much their silence cost you, how their decisions slowly drained you, but they rolled their eyes, laughed behind your back, and continued as if nothing ever happened. That illusion of peace, it was never real. It was borrowed from the suffering they ignored. And now God is collecting that debt. He's not striking them down to destroy them. He's letting their comfort unravel so they might finally understand what they refused to see in you. the value of a wounded heart, the cost of indifference, the weight of silence. And as their peace collapses, don't gloat. Watch with the humility of someone who knows what it means to be broken. Let their silence now speak the truth they buried. Let their restlessness be the lesson they once refused. Because sometimes God doesn't send storms, sometimes He just removes the illusion of peace, and the collapse begins. They silenced your pain, but God is echoing it in their minds. When someone chooses to silence your pain, they're not just rejecting your words, they're rejecting your worth. They treat your suffering as an inconvenience, your emotions as an exaggeration. They don't want to deal with the weight of your experience because it would require them to confront the truth of their actions. So they pretend. They pretend nothing happened. They pretend you're too sensitive, and that pretending becomes their false peace. But pain doesn't vanish just because it's ignored. It travels. It echoes. What was silenced in the natural begins to cry out in the spiritual. And God, in His justice, doesn't let that cry go unheard. You see, there is a mysterious exchange in the realm of justice. When man silences a cry, God turns it into a haunting echo. That's what they're beginning to feel now. Not because you're punishing them, but because the silence they demanded is now speaking back to them in moments they least expect, in the middle of the night, in quiet rooms, in unexplainable emotions, in the sudden weight that falls upon them like a shadow from nowhere. It's not your voice they hear. It's their own conscience waking up from its sleep. You once begged for just a moment of acknowledgement, a moment of compassion, but they shut it down with cold words and colder actions. Now, they cannot shut down the voice inside them, because when God echoes what was silenced, it becomes a relentless reminder, not to destroy them, but to redeem the truth they refused to face. There is no hiding from divine echoes. Not behind religion, not behind excuses, not behind success. These echoes don't scream, they whisper. And whispers are the most dangerous form of justice. They haunt the halls of the heart. They fill the spaces between a smile. They stand behind every mirror and ask the question they buried. Why did you treat them like they didn't matter? And the longer they avoid the answer, the louder the silence becomes. Let this comfort your soul. You are not forgotten. You are not overreacting. Your pain was real, and while the world dismissed it, heaven archived every moment. God doesn't need a courtroom to bring justice. He only needs a soul with a conscience, and when that conscience awakens, it becomes the very courtroom they once laughed away. So if you ever feel like no one sees, remember, God doesn't just see, He speaks. And right now your silenced pain is being echoed in the hearts that once ignored you. It's not revenge, it's mercy with a mirror. The collapse comes in layers, just like your pain did. The collapse of someone's peace doesn't always arrive as a dramatic event. Sometimes it comes gently, slowly, like dusk turning into night. And it's in that quiet unraveling that divine justice becomes visible. The same way your pain didn't show up all at once, theirs won't either. You didn't break in a single moment, you broke in phases. First it was the doubt, did I do something wrong? Then the confusion, why won't they listen? Then the shame, maybe my pain doesn't matter. And finally the numbness, that heavy numbness that replaces tears with silence. That's how collapse begins. And so it is with them. God doesn't always crush people with one blow. Sometimes He removes their peace in layers. First, the inner runners, small creeping thoughts they can't control. Then, the outer friction, relationships that no longer feel safe. Then, the spiritual void, Where once they felt confident, now they feel distant. And finally, the mental chaos, the fear that maybe they were wrong all along. This is divine symmetry. What they built their peace upon was the sand of your suffering. It was never solid. And now the tide of consequence is pulling that piece apart, one layer at a time. You're not watching their downfall, you're watching truth rise. And while the world may still applaud them, they know. Deep inside, they know the walls are thinning, the mask is cracking, the echoes are getting louder. And no achievement can protect them from what God is doing within. You don't need to announce this. You don't even need to hope for it. Just know. God is slow and deliberate in his justice because he is perfect in timing. He lets the layers fall in the same order they were built, so that every part of the collapse teaches a truth. This is not about revenge. This is about revelation. The revelation that peace stolen from another person's silence was never peace at all. And now, through the quiet undoing of their false comfort, they are invited to face what they buried, to feel what they ignored, to break the way they let you break, so that, perhaps, they can begin to change. The same silence they forced upon you will isolate them. There's a peculiar kind of cruelty in being silenced, not by force, but by indifference. You tried to speak your truth, not to stir conflict, but to find healing. And yet, your words were treated like noise. You weren't met with violence, but with something colder, distance, avoidance, and a refusal to engage with your pain. That's the silence they forced upon you. And now, that same silence is turning around to isolate them. What they once used as a shield has become a sword. You once lived in isolation, not because you wanted to, but because they made your emotions unwelcome. Every time you opened your mouth to express what you felt, you were met with denial, rolled eyes, passive-aggressive remarks, or worse, complete disregard. Slowly, the space between you and them grew, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. And you wondered, is there something wrong with me? But the truth is, there was something wrong with the way they chose silence as a weapon. Now God is letting them feel the very void they created for you. They will find themselves surrounded by people, yet feel entirely alone. Conversations will grow shallow. The laughter won't reach their hearts. The connections that once comforted them will feel thin, meaningless. And they won't understand why, but you will, because you've been there. That isolation is not punishment, it is reflection. God often allows people to taste the silence they once served to others, not because he delights in their sorrow, but because it's the only language they understand now. They wouldn't listen when you spoke softly. They dismissed you when you pleaded. So now God speaks through absence, through the emptiness they crafted. And in that emptiness they are confronted with what they truly are, not victims of your silence, but architects of it. Their relationships will begin to crack, not because of betrayal, but because the emotional foundation is gone. You can't build peace on top of buried pain. And God, in his wisdom, removes the illusion so the truth can surface. He lets the mask of connection fall apart so that they may finally face the one they silenced. This isolation doesn't scream, it doesn't rage, it simply grows quietly, steadily, like a fog that blinds them to joy, a stillness they cannot explain but cannot escape. And it's in that stillness that they may finally recognize the weight of your suffering. Do not mistake this silence for your victory. It's not about you being proven right. It's about God restoring balance to what was once unjust. The same stillness that crushed you is now becoming their teacher. And if they listen, truly listen, they might find redemption in the very silence they once used to reject you. So let it be. Let God isolate them, not to destroy, but to awaken. Let the quiet grow, not to mock them, but to mirror what they sowed. Because the silence they forced you into is now the silence that surrounds them. And unlike you, they don't know how to survive it. God will let them taste anxiety, the way you lived in it silently. There's a hidden pain in pretending to be okay. You smiled through confusion. You showed up while you were breaking. You carried conversations while your heart was heavy with unspoken grief. Anxiety was your shadow, following you into every room, lingering behind every word, tightening around your chest in the dark. But no one noticed. They didn't care to look closely. You were too quiet about it, and they were too comfortable in their peace. Now, God is letting them taste what they so easily ignored in you. Anxiety is not just a feeling, it's a prison, a place where every thought is a question, every silence is suspicious, every interaction is a minefield. You lived there not for a moment, but for seasons. While they slept soundly, you lay awake wondering what you did wrong, how you could fix it, whether you were the problem, and no one came to rescue you from it. They dismissed your struggle as overthinking, your sadness as weakness, your withdrawal as attitude. But God saw, and because God is just, He doesn't let that kind of pain pass unnoticed. He lets people drink from the cup they filled for others, not to ruin them, but to refine their hearts. And now they are waking up in the middle of the night, restless, agitated, unable to breathe. They feel surrounded by uncertainty. Paranoia grows in their minds like weeds. They can't name it, but it's there. A rising anxiety that refuses to be silenced. This is the weight of awareness. God is teaching them not by destruction, but by reflection. He's letting them feel the storm they once called drama when it was happening in your soul. You didn't ask for this. You didn't wish harm on them. All you wanted was understanding, a listening ear, a little compassion. But instead, you were made to carry your anxiety alone. Now God is letting them experience what it's like to live without peace, without emotional safety. It's not to punish, it's to reveal, to open their eyes to the damage they once dismissed. They will feel it in unexpected ways, in their relationships, their work, their solitude. The things that once comforted them now bring discomfort. The places they once found clarity now feel clouded. Their confidence will tremble, not because someone harmed them, but because they never truly understood the harm they caused. God doesn't deal in revenge, He deals in revelation. This anxiety is not random. It is divine justice echoing in the nervous system. It's heaven's way of saying, now you feel what you refused to understand. And through this unraveling, you are being lifted. Slowly, your anxiety is loosening its grip. Because your healing is not just emotional, it's spiritual. As they descend into the place you once lived in, you are being lifted out of it. That's God's justice. That's His redemption. They thought ignoring you was power, but God will show them what power truly is. There's something deeply twisted about how some people equate silence with superiority. When you tried to speak, they cut you off. When you asked for clarity, they gave you coldness. When you expressed pain, they responded with silence. Not the kind that comforts, but the kind that punishes. In their eyes, ignoring you was a power move. They believed that by withholding their attention, their affection, or even basic kindness, they held control over your emotion, and for a while, it worked. You questioned your worth. You thought, maybe I am too much. Maybe I am not enough. Maybe I deserved this silence. But none of those things were true. You didn't deserve the way they made you feel invisible. You didn't deserve the way they weaponized absence. That wasn't strength. That was cowardice, pretending to be control. And now God is peeling back the curtain. They believed ignoring you gave them the upper hand, that walking away without explanation made them powerful, that withholding love or dignity proved dominance. But God has His own definition of power, and it's not built on manipulation or silence. It's built on truth, justice, and righteousness. While they played power games, God was taking notes. Every cold glance, every unanswered message, every intentional act of withdrawal, He saw it all. Not to remember your weakness, but to record their cruelty. And now the shift begins. The silence they once used as a sword begins to isolate them. The superiority they wore like armor becomes their prison. The power they thought they held begins to dissolve, slowly, quietly, just like they silenced your pain. God begins to dismantle their peace, not in fire and thunder, but in whispers they can't silence, in shadows they can't control, in a restlessness that exposes the truth. They were never powerful. They were afraid. Afraid of accountability, afraid of emotion, afraid of truth. So they used silence as a shield and wore apathy like a crown. But now the crown is falling. Not because you took it, but because God removed the throne they sat on in pride. He does this gently, perfectly. He lets life reveal what they tried to hide. He lets their own behavior become their undoing. And in the end, it's not you who rises with vengeance. It's God who rises with justice. Because the highest power in heaven doesn't come from making someone feel small. It comes from lifting what's been crushed. You were crushed once. You were made to feel powerless. But in that crushing, God was shaping something unshakable in you. And while they felt victorious in ignoring you, heaven was preparing your restoration. Now their false peace is trembling, and as it collapses, they'll realize what true power looks like. Not silence, but truth. Not avoidance, but confrontation. Not pride, but humility. Not walking away, but making peace. You don't need to demand an apology. You don't need to chase after explanation. The same God who watched them ignore you is now showing them what it feels like to be unseen. Not by people, but by peace itself. Let them learn. Let them sit in the silence they once imposed. Let them taste the powerlessness they once handed you. Not out of revenge, but because justice has its own echo, and it always returns to the sender. In the end, the ones who thought they had power will look back and see who truly carried strength, the one who endured, stayed silent in the storm, and trusted God to speak on their behalf. That person was you. So here you are, standing in the place they never thought you'd reach. Not broken, not bitter, but built. You walked through the silence they forced upon you. You endured the dismissal, the quiet rejection, the emotional exile, and yet you did not collapse. You were refined. While they held on to peace crafted through your suppression, God was preparing something greater for you. Restoration, clarity, and divine justice. Not in a loud spectacle, but in sacred stillness. And now, the balance has begun. You don't need to announce their collapse. You don't need to gloat over their unraveling. Let God handle that. Let life teach them. Just as your pain was hidden, their fall will be unseen by crowds, but undeniable in their spirit. Their peace will unravel, thread by thread, not because you wished for it, but because heaven demands it. What they thought was power, ignoring your voice, silencing your sorrow, was nothing but spiritual ignorance, and now they will understand The soul cannot stay at peace when it is built on another's pain. What they called strength was weakness masked by pride. And God is not mocked. You were not forgotten. Your tears were not wasted. Every ache of your soul was accounted for by the one who never slumbers. And now, in his perfect justice, he is answering, not with thunder, but with quiet collapse. So stand tall. You survived what they never even acknowledged. You were strong in the silence. And now, as their silence grows louder in their own minds, you will know God has spoken on your behalf. Let their peace collapse, just like your pain was silenced, and let your healing rise, as heaven restores what was once broken in the dark. Because God never leaves the innocent unheard. He answers, always.